There's been conflict and global crises and challenges happening forever. Even if you don't think that your kid is thinking about this or exposed to it, they probably are. Even in moments of crisis, children can learn things like compassion and empathy and perspective.
If you're planning on having a conversation with a young child about elections, current events, global catastrophes of any kind, the first thing is...
Okay, Claire, this is not an easy topic, but we know it comes up and it's an important one to discuss. So.
This one's got some meat to it, so we're going to dive in. We're going to be talking today about when young children in your life ask you about current events. And usually they're asking about ones that are really hard to, even for adults, to navigate and think about.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even add to that, maybe when they're not asking, but you know they're exposed to information about it, that's equally important to think about. Is just because they're not asking doesn't mean they're not wondering.
That's right. And they hear about these things at school. They hear about them from relatives. Like you said, maybe the radio is on or the news is on in the background. And just to be clear, we're talking about things like maybe an upcoming election that might be kind of contentious.
If one were to be happening.
Yes, maybe an election that causes tension in your country. Global conflict, huge right now. So many different global conflicts happening, and kids know. Climate events, right? Big weather events that can cause really damaging effects on families all over the country. So. Kids are hearing about all of these things. They may come to you with a question, they may not, but you might be aware that they're thinking about it or heard something about it. So how do we navigate this as families, as parents of these young kids?
I think one piece that is important to understand, just backing up a little bit, is that there's been conflict and global crises and challenges happening forever. And our exposure to those things is so much higher. So it's good to be informed. It's good to have information, but also we should be thoughtful about the level of exposure we're getting, because it elevates how much we're paying attention to something or thinking about something. Sources of exposure matter. There's a lot of differences now with that too. And then how our children are exposed to that as well, because I know we're always joking about like when we were younger, and this is such an older person to say, right? But that has changed a lot. When I was growing up, we all had just a couple news channels. Everybody saw the same news. We didn't get we get national news for an hour every night. That has completely changed. So not only are these things contentious and divisive, and we're in the midst of a lot of them right now, but we're just the exposure level is really high. So we should think about that for ourselves, certainly as adults, but we definitely want to think about that with kids. And the exposure level is the two things we talked about. So they might be hearing about it somewhere in their lives and come to us and ask a question. They're probably just hearing about it somewhere in the store or wherever they're hearing about it. And then they might be thinking or wondering or making sense of it themselves without all the information. And that's something kids do.
Yes.
Or they could be hearing you talk about it. So it's not even exposure to the actual information itself. If you yourself are someone that engages in a lot of conversation about current events or divisive things, that's another form of exposure for your children that you're asking them to interpret what it all means without them having all the context, information, or even the cognitive skills to do that. And if kids make sense of things. They sometimes take a wild left turn and because they don't have all the information to make sense of it. So I think I'm just making the case for, even if you don't think that your kid is thinking about this or exposed to it, they probably are.
That's right.
And so it's worth thinking about how to have candid, honest, in a developmentally appropriate way, which I know we're going to talk about. Conversations with them.
That's right.
So you are helping them through these kinds of things rather than teaching them to avoid them or letting them make sense of it in whatever way that might happen.
Exactly what I've got two big tips if you're planning on having a conversation with a young child about elections, current events, global catastrophes of any kind. The first thing is checking your own stress before you start this conversation. If you bring a lot of your own tension or anxiety to this conversation, it will impact the whole vibe. To use a casual word, that's some bad vibes going into that conversation. Your children are extremely perceptive. They can tell if you're upset. They can tell if you're worried. And maybe you are upset and worried and stressed out and tense. I am thinking
Mhm.
about all the things going on in
Mhm.
the world. But when I talk to my children about it, I try to just, okay,
Yeah.
I can bring some safety to this
Right.
conversation for my kids. That's the first thing. The second thing is ask your child what they're curious about. Slow your roll a little bit.
Yeah.
You would probably have about 15 to 20 minutes of monologue you can launch at your child about, this is what I think about this person. That's how this decision was made. And I don't think that policy is very smart and all these things. That's your stuff.
Mhm.
Your child might just have a really simple question
Right.
about, how are votes counted in an election,
Mhm.
right? They don't need to know all the candidates' platforms, or who's helping those people who there was a tornado. Who's helping those people find that child find their teddy bear? They might have a very specific question. They don't need your 20-minute explanation about FEMA and the Red Cross, or it's sometimes we bite off more than we can chew unintentionally in those conversations.
And when I was saying being developmentally appropriate honesty, so we don't want to avoid things. We don't want to lie to children, but that's the best way to understand what they need to know and where their thinking is, so you can help them navigate understanding to the point that makes sense for them, and then understand how to manage their emotions. So if you come into it with all that stress, they're also then maybe worried about you. And then really young kids are kind of spending most of their time thinking, am I okay? And are the people in my life that I care about okay? And if you can't present that in that situation, then it adds to the challenge that you have to then continue to deal with. So presenting that I may be frustrated, and the honesty about emotions too. Something kids need to learn how to do is recognize and name emotions. So use this opportunity. If you're coming into it with frustration or concern, say that. Say, I am feeling a little frustrated. You're probably noticing that because I was walking really fast, or I had an angry look on my face.
That's right.
Here's, let's talk about why I'm frustrated. What would you like to know? And have that kind of just really open conversation where you're recognizing and naming your own feelings.
Yes.
And working through that in a a 3-year-old, 4-year-old is probably going to be asking you such a simple question. 6, 7, 8, maybe a little bit more complex depending on what they're exposed to or what they're hearing. But and you can help a lot with this, with thinking about that way back to where we started, is what they're getting exposed to. So if you are a family that has news on a lot, if they're hearing, and I mean, I feel like this is happening to me, the same headline 10 different times, it has a compound effect on you. So even though as an adult, this is the same thing, I'm just hearing about it 10 times, it still has a cumulative effect on you. A child does not have the ability to understand that. They think that's 10 separate things that are happening. So if it's about, like, I live in California. So if it's about the wildfires in California, they're going to then think 10 fires are happening.
10 new fire, like a new fire, another fire.
Exactly. To put it in simplistic form. So instead of it being one fire, which is scary enough to deal with and to think about, they get that cumulative effect. So thinking again, back to, this is like the best thing you can do is just really minimize their sources. You don't want to hide things necessarily, or you're not trying to avoid it. You're protecting them from information that they can't process developmentally, and that they don't need to process. That's different than teaching your children the values and morals that are important to you as a family. And you should absolutely do that, but you don't have to do it through a divisive, angry, frustrated place.
That's right. There's a lot of opportunities in the future to talk about that. I know that these conversations can feel difficult and kind of sticky for families, but there's so much value to sitting down with your child. And like you said, naming your feelings, asking, I'm curious about what you're thinking about. What you're saying to your child in that moment is, I care about your opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to have a tricky conversation with you. And oh my goodness, the value of that, the gift of that, when you're saying to your 5-year-old, your 4-year-old, your 6-year-old, like, I've been feeling a little, maybe you noticed that, like, grandma and I at dinner were having a kind of a heated conversation about, this thing that happened across the country. And I know that might have been uncomfortable. And I was feeling really frustrated. How are you feeling about that? Are you curious about anything? You're just tackling it head on. You're showing your child, I'm not afraid to talk about this with you. It's good to talk about it. And you can ask me questions about tricky things.
Yep. I mean, and that's going to come in handy for the rest of life, for them to know that they can come to you to talk about a tricky conversation, that they can ask open questions to you, and that you're not going to shy away from them. I mean, it's making me think two things. One is I remember some tricky questions my kids asked me, and I would also say that you don't have to answer them in the moment. So I remember a specifically tricky one that I said, that's such a good question. I'm thinking about something else right now, and I want to give you all my attention. Can we talk about that when we get home? And then you have to come back to it. But you can buy yourself a little time. You don't have to be immediate about it. Right. And that was I did have to really buy myself some time for that one, but we powered through it. That part of that, making sure kids know that they can come and talk to you about anything and that you're going to be willing to engage in that conversation and listen to their point of view. You will be so grateful that you did that when they have those really tricky questions later on in life.
Okay, so we're going to take a pause now for a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some resources. I know you've got a really great resource that you want to share with our listeners. So we're going to talk about that after the break.
Did you know that you can get the Teach, Play, Love brand of learning for your preschooler every day? The very people you trust for parenting advice are behind our Bright Horizons preschool program. Learning adventures that inspire kids to reach their unique potential. One-of-a-kind preschool for your one-of-a-kind kid. That's Bright Horizons. Enrollment is happening now. Visit brighthorizons.com to find a center near you.
Okay, we're back from our break, and I know we talked about how to have these tricky conversations, and the good news is we've got some resources to help you navigate this. I know, Rachel, you have, for those of you who are listening, you've popped open your laptop.
I have, yes. So one thing that I love that we do at Bright Horizons is things like this podcast and things like this resource I'm going to talk to you about is that we understand a lot about child development and early education, and we want to make sure that every child that is attending a Bright Horizons program gets the best of that research. But we also want to share that more broadly because we understand that it's really hard to distill research into practical, applicable tools or ideas. And so we do that in a number of ways, this podcast being one of them. But another really important one that we've done is all the way back to 9/11, our then Senior Vice President of Education, Jim Greenman, created a resource with a lot of partners called What Happened to My World. And it was just a guide about how to help children through really tough situations, whether they were personally affected, they were hearing about it on the news because everyone was hearing about it on the news, or they had maybe someone in their family was in the military or a first responder, or so they kind of had a connection, or they knew someone in New York, or whatever it might be. And then this resource was translated and changed for something happening in Haiti, something happening in Japan, tsunami, Katrina. So it was used over and over. And long story long, I think I'm at now, but we now have a version of it that is kind of event agnostic, and it is on our website. It's a PDF, and it really is for anyone working with young children, caring for young children, knows a young child, parenting a young child, just to navigate these tricky situations. So it's called What Happened to My World, and there's both a big PDF, but also there's some pullouts that are valuable. And I'm going to call your attention to a couple of them. One of them is What Children Need and the Pillars of Security. And this is consistent. So I mentioned this earlier, is that children care about the people in their life. Am I okay? Are you okay? Sometimes the answer to that isn't a yes. And so thinking about how to answer that is, here are the things that are stable. I love you. I'm going to do everything I can to protect you. We're in this together. So this is when you can't lie to your kids. Don't lie to them, but be developmentally appropriate. So you don't have to say, careful about I'm so worried, I don't know where we're going to sleep, or you don't go into that piece. They need to know that you're going to do everything you can to take care of them. If maybe we might have to ask for help. I'm going to ask a trusted, safe adult to help us. To just be really concrete, very specific in those moments, but it's the people. Then they care about the places. So they care about their space, and that can be really disrupted in a time of crisis. So you just want to think about what could be familiar about a place. What could you take from home? Just really thinking about their comfort of the space and place, and as much as you can to be in those safe, familiar places with children. And then routines is similar. Keep routines the same. Routines the same. So it's if you're embroiled in something that's going on right now, and there's a lot of things to pick from, is regardless if your child is showing any kind of anxiety or stress about these things, you want to think about these things. And you might be like in the thick of something, and you might be just on the outskirts, but these things are important in any kinds of stress. And then so routines. Keep the routine as much as you can. Wake up at the same time, no matter where you're living or staying or what's going on in the world. Keep that routine. Yeah. And then rituals, like every night you're going to read a story before bedtime. That is golden on a regular day. Yes. And then when there's times of stress, or you've had a rough day, or a rough day can be mom's off her game today. Yeah. Mom didn't do her best work today. But we're going to end with this lovely ritual we had. And so, again, with with the current stuff that's going on can cause a lot of stress and anxiety. A lot of people have family members that are in war zones or dealing with climate issues. The election is getting, the US election is getting to everybody. I know there's other elections in other countries that are causing a lot of stress and anxiety as well. So that's one I just refer people to all the time, no matter what's going on.
Pillars of security. Pillars of security.
There's other ones though, and they're related to what we're talking about. So there's one on understanding and supporting children through different kinds of stress and trauma, natural disasters, war, hate crimes, and terrorism. So I think that, of course, I'd recommend the full resource, but there are these pullouts that are about these specific kinds of events we're talking about. Yeah. And again, you can share it with teachers, you can share it with caregivers, social workers, anyone working with children or parents. So I'm glad that we have that resource and can make sure that when you have that kind of guidance as someone working with children, it is less stressful in the moment. And then you can really think about these opportunities that you have in these moments, right? Is even in moments of crisis, children can learn things like compassion and empathy and perspective. Yeah. And there can be some intentional teaching moments here too. You can, if you think about the election, right, we can think about building children's civic engagement.
I think about that as a huge opportunity for learning. Anytime there's a curiosity, which is the nicest way of saying it, or like a question or like a concern. I've got one of my kids is very, very, his temperament, he's born this way, very sensitive. And if I'm having some strong feelings about a current event, I swear he can pick up on it. He can hear my husband and I whispering about it in the next room, and he comes right in. What are you guys talking about? What happened today? What did I miss on the news? Right. And so it's an opportunity for learning. It's an opportunity for me to teach him about civic engagement, about compassion, about empathy. One thing that I did during the last presidential election 4 years ago in the US was I asked that child who was having some concerns and some anxiety about what was going on, I asked him to do a little mock vote around our house. And that was great for my youngest too. He was in early elementary school and he was super curious about that. So we said, I chose a pretty benign topic. I said, you need to go around to everyone in the house and collect votes on what we should have for dinner tonight. It's either going to be chicken or pasta. But here's the thing. You have to ask everybody why that's their vote. And I picked the topic because I knew it would be divisive because my daughter does not like chicken and I knew she'd have some strong opinions about this, but my son really likes pasta. So he was going to have to sit there and listen to her talk about why this was the superior dinner. And then he needed to report back to me. And what he'd learned was some compassion and empathy. Well, it turns out that Jane really doesn't like the chewiness of the chicken or the whatever it is, So it ended up being a little election, a little compassion, empathy lesson. Yeah. It was an easy way to explain that to him.
So I think that's a good point is you can do voting at home, you can do voting in a classroom, and you really have to go with it. So the winning vote wins.
Right. And that's part of it. Yeah.
And that can be an exercise in just learning how to manage disappointment as well. But there's a lot of fun things you can do and you can learn together. I mean, I always joke about we need how a bill becomes a law, those videos.
Schoolhouse Rock.
But we learned, our generation learned a lot from that. And most adults don't know that much about how civics and government works. So let's find out. That's a phrase we use all the time at Bright Horizons. So if your child has a question, I know we're very focused on the election piece right now, but if your child has a question about maybe global warming, why are things melting? Why is this? How do you get a fire from that? Or why are there more tornadoes now? Why is that happening? let's find out. Use it as an opportunity to learn together. You might inspire something that they want to get really involved in, that they want to care a lot about. They might, kids that care about something become adults who care about something. And we need some problem solvers in this world. We need these kids to grow up and be innovators and leaders and solvers and entrepreneurs to address a lot of these things. So caring about it is a good thing. We don't want to dismiss those things. We can use that opportunity to go, what could we do? And the other thing is you can do a lot of compassionate activities or as a family, think about what you want to do to be contributors to society. So when kids feel like they have some control and they can do something about an issue that they're worried about, that helps quite a bit. So a simple thing that we do all the time at Bright Horizons is engage teachers, families, all of us kids into making blankets. And we do those tie blankets with fleece and then we donate them. And that's a really nice one, for example, to do with kids because they understand the importance of a blanket and making sure people have blankets. You can also do it with letting them pick out a book to donate, or you can go somewhere and help people get fed or whatever it is. You can make little kits for your car that you can distribute. Whatever kind of engagement or allows them to participate in giving back or doing something about the thing they're concerned about, that's actually a great learning opportunity. You're building and developing your child on an issue that they care about. So there's like some good opportunities here. And we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that in talking about the trickiness of it. Even if you as a family, we were talking about, be developmentally appropriate. So I might say, I would really like to participate in this protest and I want my children to be part of this or this event, or I want to go to this in support of this or whatever it is. You can bring them, you can expose them. We're not saying to not engage them or expose them to things, but a conversation about why this is important, what you're doing, what are they learning about it, what do they think about it, versus just letting them be kind of victim, that's probably not the right word, but letting them just be absorbed into the moment and all the adult conversation and figure it out on themselves. You have to help them navigate through that. And again, help them be critical thinkers and critical consumers of the information so it doesn't feel scary and oppressive and stressful, but that they feel like they're learning about something, they get some control over something. And if that's something that's important to you in a way that you're teaching them your values and what your family believes in, that's okay. You're just going to help them through that. So I think what we're saying is tricky conversation. Don't avoid it.
Don't avoid it. Keep your own stress in check.
Find the opportunity for teaching and developing. And use the resources and give yourself the time to make sure that you feel confident and comfortable. Don't avoid the conversation and make sure you check out What Happened to My World.
Get parenting advice from Rachel and Claire. You can leave them a voicemail by calling 617-673-8881. And your question may be answered in a future episode of Teach, Play, Love. You can also send them an email at teach.playlove@brighthorizons.com. For more expert guidance on early childhood development, check out our family resources at brighthorizons.com.
Thanks for listening.
Subscribe to us. Find more episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
See you next time on Teach, Play, Love.
And discover parenting as the joy it was meant to be.